The Rockets have reached an agreement on a trade for the Clippers CP3. Rockets send Sam Dekker, Patrick Beverley, and Lou Will to the Clippers. Stephen A., your reaction to this news?
I wish I could say I'm surprised. I'm really not. You were hopeful because you know that Chris Paul loves Los Angeles. But like Mark Stein and Ramona Shelburne, they've been all over this situation all year long. You've seen the situation in Los Angeles diminish to some degree. Chris Paul's relationship with Doc Rivers is not the greatest. I mean, they get along to some degree, but trust me, Chris Paul wasn't about being hesitant about leaving. He was looking to move on. He was hoping that it could be in Cleveland with this guy, LeBron James. But from what I'm hearing, that wasn't going to materialize because Dan Gilbert made the move, to let go of David Griffin. And as a result, you didn't have a real GM working those phones and making sure things happen. And so your second alternative option was Houston. And this is what's going on here. Chris Paul's willingness to go to Houston is not just about James Harden. It's also about the possibility that Carmelo will go there. Because if Carmelo Anthony receives the buyout that he desires to get, which Phil Jackson, by the way, was willing to give him and James Dolan was not, if Carmelo Anthony coaxes James Dolan into giving him a buyout, I'm being told that Carmelo Anthony may very well go to Houston. He and Chris Paul are very, very tight, and they wouldn't mind being in Houston with James Harden at all because they believe that kind of firepower is what it's going to take to knock off the Golden State Warriors. So this move by Chris Paul could very well be, just an indication of things to come. This may not be the last move that they make. They don't have but so much to trade if you're Houston, now that you've given away Dekker and Lou Williams and Patrick Beverley, who I'm a huge fan of, but you also could position yourself to you don't have any cap room or anything like that, but if Melo pulls off getting waived by the New York Knicks, getting bought out of his contract, he will go to Houston in all likelihood, joining Chris Paul and James Harden. That's what I've been hearing over the last hour.
All right, Stephen A., so help me break this down, because when we first heard about the possibility of CP3 going to the Rockets, we thought, well, listen, James Harden had a standout year, an MVP year at the point. So how do the two now coexist, in your opinion?
Very simple. There isn't a point guard alive that is not going to defer to Chris Paul, the point guard. You may defer in other ways. You may not defer in other ways. But as a point guard, you will not hesitate to defer to Chris Paul. In terms of a floor orchestrator, somebody who literally runs the show, there's nobody better than Chris Paul. So whether it's LeBron, Melo, James Harden, or anybody else, nobody has a problem with stepping away from the point guard spot if they have the ability to score, that is. They have no problem stepping away from the point guard spot and handing the ball to Chris Paul because they know Chris Paul knows how to run a team, and they know that Chris Paul is going to get them the ball and take immense pressure. And if you're James Harden, especially so, because if you remember, no matter how electrifying he looked throughout this year, averaging 29, 11, and 8, leading the league in assists, that last game of the playoffs against San Antonio was emblematic and indicative of a man who was incredibly exhausted from having to handle ball playmaking responsibilities as long as being the primary scorer. He looked completely spent and out of it. And I think D'Antoni recognizes that, which is why D'Antoni and Daryl Morey obviously have no problem whatsoever with Chris Paul being their new point guard.
All right, so then talk me through this, because you wanted to talk about Jerry West some weeks ago coming to the Clippers and what it would mean for the Clippers. They bring him there, due in large part to help them get over the hump. They lose CP3. What does that say to us about the relationship that perhaps Chris Paul had with that organization, and what does that mean for Jerry West now, an advisor to the Clippers, brought in from Golden State?
Well, first of all, it wasn't necessarily a bad relationship, but at the end of the day, the greatness of Chris Paul was stained by the fact that he's never played in a conference finals, let alone an NBA finals. And listen, Chris Paul is all about winning. This man has an attitude. He is a pit bull. When he loses, he is absolutely positively miserable. And he will not hesitate to tell you why he thinks he's losing. And so you take that into consideration. At times, he and Doc Rivers were not on the same page, according to what I'm hearing. We all know Doc Rivers to be a great coach and a champion. But if the Los Angeles Clippers were so pleased with Doc Rivers, Jerry West wouldn't be there. Jerry West is there because Steve Ballmer obviously thinks something needs to be done to modify circumstances to such a degree. So now here you are. You keep Blake Griffin. You keep a DeAndre Jordan. You have a Patrick Beverly and a Louis Williams and a Sam Decker. So you get three bodies for one. Do you have the playmaker that is Chris Paul? No. But you do have two very quality players in Patrick Beverly and Lou Williams, one on offense, one definitely on defense. Sam Decker is no scrub, and you have those additional bodies, which adds depth to your roster where you're not at the mercy of just your starting five, which by and large people looked at the Clippers as being. Yeah, Austin Rivers and Jamal Crawford came off the bench, but that wasn't deemed as a viable bench in terms of the Clippers organization. And because of that, they knew they needed to add bodies, and they were hell-bent on making sure that they didn't lose Chris Paul for nothing. So this serves both sides, even though I'm of the belief that Chris Paul is sensational as a point guard, and that's a devastating loss for the Clippers no matter which way you slice it.